I arrive at the Crestview Plaza Hotel late in the evening, my body heavy with the exhaustion of delayed flights and endless phone calls. The lobby is a picture of modern elegance. Marble floors gleaming under chandelier light, a concierge desk manned by perfectly dressed attendants. I check in quickly and receive my key card, room 1504. A high floor with a view of the city skyline, a rare treat for my typically mundane business trips. The elevator dings softly as it opens, and I step in, pressing the button for the 15th floor. The doors slide shut, and the lift glides upward smoothly. At the 14th floor, the elevator pauses, then skips directly to the 16th floor. Confused, I press the button again, but it doesn't respond. I return to the lobby, where the receptionist looks at me quizzically. "There is no 15th floor," she says with an apologetic smile. "You must be mistaken." I hold out the key card. "It says 1504. She frowns, but her professional mask quickly slips back into place. "Let me look into that. For now, I'll assign you a new room." But I'm stubborn. The notion of a room on a non-existent floor stirs my curiosity. Ignoring her reassurances, I take the stairs, ascending through the dimly lit stairwell. Each step echoes, the sound growing louder as I climb. The stairs should end at 16, but to my astonishment, the door labeled 15 looms before me. The hallway is eerily silent. The air smells faintly of mildew, and the fluorescent lights flicker irregularly. My steps feel hesitant as I move down the corridor, counting the numbers on the doors until I reach 1504. The keycard works, and the lock clicks open. Inside, the room is as unremarkable as any business-class hotel suite. Beige walls, a generic painting above the bed, and a faintly buzzing TV. But it's the suitcase in the corner that catches my attention. It isn't mine. I approach it cautiously, unzipping the bag. My stomach tightens as I sift through its contents. Fake passports with photos that are not mine, bundles of cash and foreign currencies, and a series of printed photographs. Each picture shows a crime scene, brutal, violent, and recent. My name is scribbled on a police report visible in one of the images. The doorknob rattles, and I freeze. A burly man in a security uniform enters, his eyes cold and unyielding. "You weren't supposed to be here," he says, his voice low and menacing. "I don't know what's happening," I stammer, backing away. He steps closer, his hand resting on the baton at his waist. "You need to leave now. Forget you ever saw this." My instincts scream at me to run, and I do, darting past him into the hallway. I can hear him shouting behind me as I stumble down the stairs, heart pounding in my ears. By the time I reach the lobby, he's gone, but so is my explanation. When I try to report the incident, I find no trace of my reservation in the hotel system. Even my colleagues deny knowledge of my trip. I am left grappling with the chilling realization. Someone has orchestrated this, a setup to make me complicit in crimes I had no hand in. Every attempt to clear my name leads to more evidence stacking against me. And worst of all, I now feel eyes following me everywhere. My life, as I knew it, is over. I've worked at Premier Solutions Call Center for nearly 3 years. It's monotonous, but it pays the bills. Most days, I field complaints about defective products, billing errors, and the occasional screaming customer convinced we're conspiring against them. Today feels different. It starts with a peculiar spike in calls. One after another, people are asking for help with something called the Raven system. They're distressed, voices trembling as they describe what sounds like technical glitches, unauthorized charges, locked devices, inexplicable data losses. But here's the thing. There's no record of a Raven system in our database. "Are you sure you've reached the right company?" I ask, feeling ridiculous as the same scenario repeats. Each caller insists Premier Solutions is the contact listed. I bring it up to my manager, Anna, but she brushes it off as a database error. "Stick to the script," she says curtly. "If it's not in the system, it's not our problem." Still, curiosity eats at me. During my lunch break, I dig deeper, running a search across internal logs and files. Nothing. But just as I'm about to give up, a hidden folder catches my eye. It's password protected, but a few educated guesses based on company naming conventions crack it open. Inside are documents marked confidential and files referring to a special client services division. I scroll through with growing unease. These aren't standard support logs, they're operational instructions. Most entries are vague, coded in a way I can't fully decipher, but the patterns are clear: data collection, personal targeting, and problem resolution. One document outlines instructions for handling high-profile individuals requiring permanent solutions. My stomach twists as I realize this isn't about customer service. It's something darker, something sinister. The office feels colder when I return to my desk. My hands tremble slightly as I answer the next call. Another Raven system complaint. Before I can respond, the line goes dead. Seconds later, my phone buzzes. It's not a customer this time. It's a message from an unknown number. Stop looking. Final warning. I glance around the room. The usual hum of conversation fills the air, but something feels off. Stories Compilation. I know I should stop. Let it go. But the fear in those callers' voices won't leave my mind. Against my better judgment, I email the file to my personal account, wiping the traces of my access as best I can. By the time my shift ends, I've convinced myself it's paranoia, just an internal security measure gone overboard. But the uneasy silence that greets me at home tells me I'm wrong. My apartment is exactly as I left it, yet it feels disturbed. A glass sits slightly out of place on the counter. My laptop, which I closed that morning, is open. The email I sent myself is gone. I check the trash folder. Empty. My pulse quickens. The phone rings, breaking the heavy stillness. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity wins out, and I listen. The voice on the other end is flat, monotone. You've seen too much. You're part of this now. The line cuts off with a click. I lock every door and window, but it's no use. That night, I barely sleep, jumping at every creak and groan of the building. The next day at work, Anna corners me. Her smile is tight, unnatural. We've had some complaints about you accessing unauthorized files. Company policy is strict on that. I hope you're not investigating anything outside your responsibilities. Her tone is a warning, but her eyes hold something darker, a silent threat. I quit on the spot, gathering my things under her watchful gaze. But even as I leave the building, I know it's not over. My phone buzzes again. Another message. There's no leaving. We'll be in touch. Weeks later, I catch glimpses of strangers watching me, their faces too familiar to be coincidence. I delete all my social media, switch apartments, and get a new number, but the calls keep coming. And deep down, I know the truth. I didn't just uncover a secret. I became one. It starts with a notification, one I don't recognize. My phone vibrates softly on the desk, and when I glance down, I see a calendar invite for something cryptic. Initiation, 8 p.m., Folsom St. The sender is listed as confidential access. Confused, I unlock my phone. I don't recall subscribing to any shared calendar, let alone one with such an ominous title. A quick check confirms my worst fear. It's integrated into my account. My daily schedule now mingles with dozens of entries that aren't mine. Observation complete. Subject located. The times and places are scattered across cities and countries I've never been to. At first, I think it's spam, maybe a glitch. I delete the calendar app and reinstall it. It syncs again, uninvited, the same events reappearing like weeds. By the third day, curiosity pushes me further. Each event includes precise GPS coordinates. Against my better judgment, I click on one labeled extraction. It's a location in Tokyo, a narrow alleyway, based on the Street View image. Another entry takes me to Berlin, pinpointing a seemingly nondescript building. There's no context, no details, just the suffocating implication that something deliberate and coordinated is happening. I can't shake the sense that I've stumbled into something forbidden. Each entry feels heavier than the last, like a trap designed to see how far I'll go. A new notification pops up that evening. Delivery confirmed, 11:30 p.m., Central Park. This one chills me to the bone because it's here, in my city, close enough to walk. I debate for hours, pacing my apartment as my pulse flutters in my chest. Finally, I convince myself to go, not because I'm brave, but because not knowing feels worse. My roommate, Tim, thinks I'm insane when I explain. Just ignore it, he says. It's probably some weird prank. But as the time ticks closer, I leave anyway. I tell myself it's just a walk, nothing more. The park is quiet when I arrive, bathed in the faint amber glow of streetlights. The event is pinned near a bench by the lake. It's empty when I approach, save for an envelope taped to the backrest. My name is written on it in bold, sharp letters. Hands trembling, I tear it open. Inside is a single sheet of paper listing my home address, workplace, and even my favorite coffee shop. Below that, there's a phrase scrawled in an unfamiliar, angular handwriting. You're already involved. The urge to run consumes me. I sprint back to my apartment, lungs burning, heart threatening to burst. Tim is on the couch, eyes glued to the TV. When I barge in, babbling about the envelope, he looks up, confused. What envelope? I hold it out, but it's gone. My pockets are empty, my hands bare. I feel the blood drain from my face as Tim tilts his head. You okay, man? The next day, the calendar is still there. But now, my locations have appeared in the entries. My work commute, my gym sessions, even my grocery runs. Each event is labeled with precision. Approach window, 7:45 p.m. Panic tightens my chest as I delete my account, wiping every trace of it from my phone. It doesn't matter. A new notification comes through an hour later, this time with no app or email address attached. Just a subject line. You can't delete the truth. I go to the police, but the officer seems unimpressed. Probably a stalker, he says, barely looking up from his screen. Change your passwords, get a security system. That night, I hear footsteps outside my apartment. When I peek through the peephole, no one is there. A message waits on my phone when I turn back. Stop looking out the window. The following day, I resign from my job and pack what I can carry. I leave the city, heading for a remote cabin I've visited only once before. No phone, no internet, just isolation. But even here, I feel it. The suffocating knowledge that wherever I go, the calendar will follow. I'm already a name on their list, and the only question left is what the next event will say. The train jerks to a sudden stop, throwing me forward in my seat. The fluorescent lights flicker, dimming to a sickly yellow glow before stabilizing. I glance at my watch, 11:43 p.m. The late-night train is nearly empty, save for a handful of passengers scattered across the car. I lean forward, trying to peer out the window, but all I see is darkness. No station, no familiar landmarks, just an endless void pressing against the glass. The intercom crackles, and the conductor's voice, distorted and faint, announces something unintelligible before cutting off entirely. A few seats down, a woman in a red coat is fiddling with her phone, her face tense. A man across the aisle grumbles under his breath, glancing at his watch every few seconds. An older couple near the front sits in uncomfortable silence. We're all strangers, and yet the shared unease binds us in the stillness. The lights flicker again, plunging us into near darkness for an agonizing few seconds. When they return, the atmosphere feels heavier, the silence oppressive. I notice something strange etched into the window beside me. Symbols carved into the glass, faint but deliberate. They look like they've been there for years, though I've never noticed them before. Did you see that? The woman in red asks, her voice breaking the silence. Her eyes dart nervously between the other passengers. See what? Someone responds. When the lights went out, I thought I saw someone standing outside. The man scoffs. We're in the middle of nowhere. No one's out there. But her words ignite a spark of fear in the rest of us. A low murmur of unease spreads through the car as we exchange nervous glances. The intercom crackles again, spitting static. No voice this time. I grip the edge of my seat as the lights flicker once more. When they return, something is different. A bag sits in the aisle, plain and worn, as though it had always been there. Yet I know it wasn't. Curiosity pulls me forward. Is this anyone's? I ask, but my voice feels thin, swallowed by the stale air. No one answers. I kneel beside the bag, hesitating before unzipping it. The stench of decay hits me first, sharp and sour. Inside, I find a stack of papers. They're old, their edges curling and yellowed, and they're filled with photographs. One by one, I flip through them. Faces stare back at me, passengers from this very train car. The man with the watch, the woman in red, the elderly couple. And me. My throat tightens as I recognize myself in the last photo, seated exactly where I am now. "What is that?" the woman asks, standing abruptly. "Just some junk," I lie, shoving the papers back into the bag and sliding it under a seat. The man in the aisle stands too, his voice low and suspicious. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing." I snap, but my unease is palpable. The woman steps closer, her expression hardening. One by one, the other passengers rise, their eyes narrowing. I feel their gazes drilling into me, sharp and accusing. "I didn't bring that bag," I stammer. "It was just here." The lights flicker again, and this time, they don't come back on immediately. In the pitch black, I hear a shuffling noise, soft but deliberate, moving through the car. Then a scream, cut short, wet and gurgling. The lights snap back on, and the elderly couple is gone. Panic erupts. We rush to the door at the far end of the car, pounding on it, yelling for help. It doesn't budge. The symbols on the windows seem brighter now, glowing faintly as though they're mocking us. "Stay together," someone says, but it's too late. The lights flicker once more, and when they return, another passenger is missing. The bag in the aisle is gone, too. I realize with a sickening certainty that we are being erased, one by one. Whatever this is, whoever is doing this, has already decided how this ends. And I have no idea how much time I have left. When the job offer came, it felt like everything was finally aligning. A prestigious company, a generous relocation package, and a fresh start in a city I'd only visited in fleeting moments of escape from my small-town life. The agency took care of everything, packing my belongings, finding an apartment, even setting up utilities. All I had to do was show up. I arrived in Millhaven just after sunset, my car trailing the moving truck through quiet, tree-lined streets. My new apartment was a dream, a bright, modern space with wide windows overlooking a park. The movers had already unpacked, my furniture and boxes neatly arranged. But as I wandered through the rooms, something felt off. The personal touches were too personal. Picture frames adorned the walls with photos of a family I didn't recognize. A couple with a young daughter at a beach, a Christmas tree sparkling in the background of another shot. The faces were warm and familiar, but not mine. I called the relocation agency immediately. "There's been a mistake," I said, pacing the pristine living room. "This isn't my stuff." Their response was unnervingly calm. "We personalize our client spaces to make them feel more like home. Enjoy the transition." The line went dead before I could argue. By morning, the neighborhood had begun to intrude on my unease. As I stepped out for a walk, every neighbor I passed greeted me warmly. By name. They asked how the move went, reminisced about events I'd supposedly attended, and welcomed me back like an old friend returning after years away. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else," I told an elderly man with a kind smile and thick glasses. He chuckled and waved dismissively. "Always joking, aren't you?" Back at the apartment, I rifled through drawers and cabinets. Every detail of the life I was supposedly living was accounted for. Bills in my name, a collection of books I'd never read, and clothing that fit perfectly but wasn't mine. Even the pantry was stocked with brands I usually bought. It was like stepping into a simulation of my life, close enough to feel real, but too polished to believe. The turning point came when I tried to leave. My car, parked neatly in the garage the day before, wouldn't start. The key fob didn't even unlock the doors. A call to the agency yielded a swift, almost cheerful response. "We've arranged local transportation. No need to worry." Frustrated, I walked to the bus stop a few blocks away. The moment I stepped aboard, the driver turned to me with a smile. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said, nodding toward a seat. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My chest felt tight, my thoughts spiraling. Every face on the bus was familiar. Too familiar. Each passenger glanced at me with faint recognition, their polite smiles lingering just a second too long. At work, my colleagues acted as though they'd known me for years. They referenced inside jokes I didn't understand, praised work I'd supposedly done, and laughed as if we shared memories that didn't exist. I kept up the facade as best I could, but the strain was suffocating. That evening, I found a letter slipped under my door. The envelope was unmarked, but inside was a single sheet of paper. Written in a precise, elegant script were 3 words. "You signed it." Panic clawed at my throat as I scanned the room. My lease agreement, tucked into a drawer, was filled with clauses I didn't remember signing. One stood out. Residents agree to permanent relocation without recourse or withdrawal. I tried calling the agency again, but the line was disconnected. Emails bounced back as undeliverable. When I ran to a neighbor's house for help, they greeted me with the same unsettling familiarity. "You're part of this now," they said softly, almost apologetically. "It's better if you stop fighting." That night, I packed a bag and ran. The bus, the sidewalks, the train station, all routes out of Millhaven seemed to loop back to my apartment. Every street felt like a labyrinth designed to hold me here. The next morning, I woke to find my bag unpacked, my clothes folded neatly back in the drawers. On the dining table sat a fresh cup of coffee and a note. "Welcome home. I haven't tried leaving since." The hall is abuzz with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of a string quartet. I should feel elated. It's my wedding day. But something about the man seated in the corner, his presence unnoticed by anyone else, ties a knot of unease in my stomach. I first notice him during dinner. He's dressed appropriately. A dark suit, tie neatly knotted, but his chair is slightly pushed back from the table, almost as if he's hesitant to join. I nudge my best man, Ian, and nod toward the stranger. "Do you know him?" Ian shakes his head, distracted by the lively conversation at our table. "Probably one of Sarah's relatives," he says. "Sarah, my bride, is radiant tonight." Her laughter echoes across the room as she leans in to talk to her maid of honor. I want to ask her about the man, but it feels petty to interrupt this moment of joy. Still, I can't ignore the way the man occasionally glances at me, his expression blank, yet strangely heavy. After the speeches and first dance, I step away from the crowd, needing air. As I make my way to the terrace, the man intercepts me. His approach is unhurried, deliberate, and my heart quickens. He holds out an envelope without a word. "What's this?" I ask. He says nothing, offering a small, tight smile before turning and walking away. I call after him, but he disappears into the crowd like smoke. Curiosity outweighs caution, and I open the envelope. Inside is a photograph. My breath catches. It's Sarah, but not the woman I know. Her dress is bloodied, her hands clutching a knife. She stands over a man's crumpled body. The photo is stark, raw, and unmistakably real. The room spins as I shove the picture back into the envelope. My first thought is denial. It has to be fake. A cruel prank, maybe, but something about the vivid detail, the way her expression is caught mid-movement, gnaws at me. I find Sarah near the bar, her laughter faltering when she sees my face. "Are you okay?" she asks, concerned. I hold out the envelope. "Do you know anything about this?" Her eyes widen when she sees the photo, but instead of shock, I detect something more restrained. "Where did you get this?" she asks quietly. "That man, the one in the corner." Sarah's gaze flits across the room, searching. "What man?" "He gave it to me just now." "He was here, Sarah?" She shakes her head, her face pale. "There's no one like that here." Her response feels too quick, too practiced. The music swells behind us, the crowd oblivious to my growing panic. "Who's in this picture, Sarah?" I press. She hesitates. "It's complicated." I step back. "Complicated? You're standing over a body." "Please," she whispers, her hand clutching my arm. "Not here." But the answer she owes me doesn't come. Instead, she retreats into the crowd, leaving me stranded in my own wedding. The rest of the night passes in a blur. I barely notice the cake cutting, the toasts, or the send-off. By the time we leave for the hotel, I've resigned myself to silence, Sarah's excuses weighing heavily between us. The next morning, she's gone. Our suite is untouched. No signs of a rushed departure. No note explaining her absence. Panicked, I call her phone. It rings twice before a recorded voice says the number is no longer in service. I scramble for answers, checking our bank accounts, only to find them wiped clean. Social media, emails, shared files. Everything tied to Sarah has vanished. Even the wedding photos on my phone are gone, leaving behind only black, corrupted images. I go to the police with the photo from the envelope. They study it carefully, but when I ask if they can trace the man who gave it to me, they look confused. "You said someone handed you this?" An officer asks. "Yes, at the wedding. We reviewed the guest list you provided. Everyone accounted for. No one matches the description you gave." I sit in stunned silence as their words sink in. Sarah's gone, leaving nothing behind but questions. The man who triggered it all is a ghost, a shadow that's stolen my life's happiest day and left it warped into a nightmare. I don't know who Sarah really was, but somewhere out there, she's walking free, and I'm the one left piecing together the ruins. I never paid much attention to the house at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was neat, symmetrical, with a freshly painted fence and a lawn that looked like it was trimmed by hand. But in the 6 months since I'd moved in, I hadn't seen a single soul enter or leave. It became a quiet curiosity, something to ponder in passing, but never to dwell on. Until the night the lights came on. I'd been out late, walking my dog, when I noticed the soft, amber glow spilling from one of the second-story windows. A shadow flickered briefly across the curtains, and I froze. Someone was there. After months of silence, the house was no longer empty. The next day, I asked my neighbor, Julie, about it. "The people in the end house," I said, trying to sound casual. "Do they ever come out?" Julie frowned, tapping her chin. "I don't think so. I've been here 5 years, and I've never met them. Heard they're reclusive." That night, I sat on my porch, watching the house. Around 9 p.m., the light in the upstairs window blinked on again. This time, it stayed on for nearly an hour before fading into darkness. I told myself it wasn't unusual. Maybe someone worked odd hours. Maybe they didn't like socializing. But the next morning, I noticed something strange. The trash cans were at the curb, perfectly aligned, though no one had seen them placed there. It became a habit, watching the house looking for signs of life. I saw curtains shift, a car parked briefly in the driveway before vanishing again. But there were never footsteps, never faces, never anything concrete. The house felt alive, but unseen. 3 weeks later, my dog bolted during our walk, tearing toward the house before I could stop him. I chased after him, panting by the time I reached the fence. I called his name, but he didn't come back. He stood frozen, staring at the house, his ears flat against his head. "Buddy," I snapped, tugging his leash. He finally turned, but not before glancing back one last time, whining softly. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from behind those closed curtains. Curiosity turned to obsession. I started leaving earlier for work, lingering near the house to see if anyone left. I came home at random hours, hoping to catch movement. But the house remained stubbornly still, as though it were taunting me with its emptiness. Then came the letter. It was slipped under my door one morning, the envelope plain and unmarked. Inside was a single piece of paper, typed in block letters. "Stop asking questions." My stomach churned as I reread the message. How did they know? Had they been watching me as closely as I was watching them? That night, the lights in the house didn't come on. The windows stared back at me, black and cold, and for the first time, I felt truly uneasy. I decided to confront the mystery head-on. Armed with a flashlight, I waited until midnight before slipping out of my house. The cul-de-sac was silent, the air thick with the scent of damp grass. My steps felt deafening as I approached the house, my flashlight beam bouncing off the pristine white fence. The front door was locked, of course, but the side gate creaked open with a gentle push. The backyard was immaculate, the grass freshly cut, not a single leaf out of place. It felt staged, too perfect, As I circled toward the back of the house, my flashlight flickered. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in the upstairs window, a flash of white, like a face peeking out. But when I looked again, there was nothing. The back door was ajar. My heart hammered as I stepped inside. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of cleaning products. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of a refrigerator. The living room was spotless, devoid of personal touches. No family photos, no books, nothing to suggest someone actually lived here. I moved toward the staircase, gripping the banister tightly. Each step creaked under my weight. On the second floor, I found myself in a long hallway lined with closed doors. I hesitated, the stillness pressing in on me, before reaching for the nearest doorknob. Behind it was a small room, empty save for a single chair and a camera mounted on a tripod, its lens pointed at the window. The other rooms were the same, bare, sterile, each containing a single piece of equipment: cameras, monitors, recording devices. The house wasn't a home. It was a surveillance hub, and I was the one being watched. When I returned home, shaken, another letter was waiting for me. This one read, "Last warning. Mind your own business." The lights in the house at the end of the cul-de-sac never came on again, and I've stopped walking my dog after dark. When I first moved into my dorm, I didn't think much about its history. To me, it was just another room, with faded carpeting and walls painted in a shade of beige that seemed designed to sap the life out of anyone who stared too long. I was ready for late-night study sessions, dorm-wide pranks, and awkward social mixers. But I wasn't ready for what I found tucked in the back of my closet. It was a notebook wedged behind a loose panel. Its cover was plain black, worn and frayed at the edges. I thought maybe a previous resident had left it behind, a forgotten diary, or some notes for a long-abandoned class. Curiosity got the better of me, and I flipped it open. The pages were filled with erratic handwriting, frantic scrawls that looped and dipped wildly across the paper. At first, the words didn't make sense, just disconnected phrases. Never break the pact. It won't stop. But the deeper I read, the more coherent it became. The notebook described a group of students who had lived in this dorm room years before me. They'd made some kind of agreement, what the notebook called the Pact. The details were unclear, but the writer seemed terrified of breaking it, whatever it was. I closed the notebook, my hands trembling. It felt like holding a confession. I shoved it back into the closet and tried to focus on unpacking, telling myself it was just a prank or the ramblings of an overactive imagination. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The first message came the next morning. It was written on my whiteboard, the one mounted on my dorm door for casual notes and doodles. A single phrase scrawled in neat, deliberate letters: "Finish the pact." I froze, staring at the words. My hallmates were pranksters, sure, but something about this felt targeted, intentional. I wiped the board clean and tried to laugh it off. The messages kept coming. Each one was sharper, more urgent. Time's running out. You know what you need to do. Notes began appearing in my backpack, under my pillow, in my notebooks. I stopped sleeping. I started checking every corner of my room before lying down at night, convinced someone was sneaking in when I wasn't looking. When I brought it up to my roommate, Rachel, she brushed it off. "It's just someone messing with you," she said. "Ignore it and they'll stop." But ignoring it didn't help. The messages only got worse. One night, I woke to find my laptop open on my desk, a document I didn't recognize pulled up. The words on the screen were the same as before: "Finish the pact." I hadn't opened the laptop, and Rachel was out of town for the weekend. I decided to confront the history of the room. I went to the library, digging through old student records and dorm assignments. The names from the notebook matched with students who had lived in my room 6 years ago. 2 of them had dropped out unexpectedly. 1 transferred schools. The 4th? She disappeared completely. When I asked the dorm administrator about her, his face went pale. "That's not something we talk about," he muttered before walking away. The final straw came 2 nights later. I woke to a sound, soft, almost imperceptible, like the scratching of nails on a desk. My lamp flickered as I sat up, my chest tight with dread. The closet door, which I always kept shut, was open just a crack. The notebook was on the floor, Its pages spread wide. Written in the same erratic scrawl was a new message. If you don't finish it, they'll come for you next. I left the dorm that night, packed a bag, drove to my parents' house, and never looked back. I told the school I couldn't live there anymore, citing personal reasons. They let me switch to an off-campus apartment without asking too many questions. I don't know what the pact was or why it mattered so much. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the notebook still sitting in that closet, and I wonder if the next person who finds it will do what I couldn't. The email arrived late on a Thursday evening. It was succinct, almost curt. Your audition has been rescheduled. Details to follow. I've been waiting months for this chance, a major studio project that could change everything. But now, the tone of the email left me uneasy. No contact name, no phone number, just a vague promise of follow-up. The next morning, I called the casting office, but no one answered. The receptionist's voicemail was full. I paced my apartment, the creeping suspicion that something wasn't right gnawing at the edges of my mind. Still, I convinced myself it was just industry chaos. Rescheduling happens all the time, right? Later that day, a text came through. Meet at Studio 5, 9 p.m. Alone. No names. No studio address. Just coordinates. My gut screamed to ignore it. But desperation is a powerful motivator. I was already running out of rent money, and missing this could mean the end of my fragile career. I arrived at the coordinates a little after 8:30. It wasn't a studio. It was an old, unmarked warehouse on the city's outskirts. The air smelled of rust and damp concrete. A single flickering bulb lit the entrance. For a long moment, I just sat in my car staring at the building. Everything about it felt wrong, but I'd come this far, and turning back felt like failure. The heavy metal door groaned as I pushed it open. Inside, the space was cavernous, filled with towering stacks of equipment draped in dust-covered tarps. A single spotlight illuminated the center of the room, where a folding chair waited. Next to it was a man in a black suit, his face partially obscured by shadow. "You're late," he said, his voice sharp and emotionless. "I thought the audition was canceled," I said, stepping closer. He gestured to the chair. "Seat." The room felt colder as I obeyed, the air heavy with silence. The man didn't introduce himself or explain the situation. Instead, he handed me a single sheet of paper. "Read." The script was unusual, disjointed and vague. The dialogue hinted at betrayal, secrets, and something lurking just out of sight. It was hauntingly specific, as though it had been written for me. My voice trembled as I read, the words sticking in my throat like shards of glass. When I finished, the man simply nodded. "Good. You'll do." "What does that mean?" I asked, rising from the chair. He didn't answer. Instead, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a contract, already filled out with my name and personal details. The terms were baffling. No public appearances, no personal projects, and absolute confidentiality. The pay was astronomical, enough to solve every problem I'd ever had. "This isn't a typical role," the man said. "You'll be part of something larger, a story that shapes the world." My mouth went dry. "I don't understand." "You don't need to," he said, his tone final. "Sign or leave." I hesitated, pen hovering over the page. The promise of stability, the escape from financial ruin, was intoxicating. But the contract's vagueness gnawed at me. What if I say no? The man stepped closer, his shadow swallowing the light. "If you refuse, there's no going back to the life you had." I scribbled my name, the weight of my choice sinking in immediately. The man nodded once, taking the paper. "You'll hear from us soon." Days turned into weeks. I heard nothing. My calls to the number on the contract went unanswered. I started to think I'd been conned, until the news broke. Protests in a city I'd never visited. A major scandal erupting in Washington. The key players all looked eerily familiar. People I'd seen during the audition, their faces blurred in memory. They weren't actors. They were pawns in something far more sinister. My likeness appeared next. A manipulated video of me at a press conference, delivering a statement I'd never said. My phone buzzed constantly. Calls from reporters, strangers demanding answers. My face was plastered across headlines, linked to events I had no part in. I tried to run, packed a bag, deleted my social media, changed my number. But everywhere I went, I saw shadows watching. The contract's terms weren't just words. They were a sentence. I became a ghost, a puppet in someone else's story, living under the constant threat of being erased entirely if I stepped out of line. And worst of all, I'll never know who's pulling the strings or why. When my mom first moved into Sunrise Pines, I thought it was the perfect solution. The brochures boasted cutting-edge amenities, 24/7 medical care, and a community full of happy retirees. It wasn't cheap, but after months of her struggling to manage on her own, it felt like the right decision. She seemed excited about it too, charmed by the cheerful staff and the promise of independence. The first few weeks were uneventful. Mom adjusted well, even made a few friends. She raved about the gardens, the movie nights, and the dinners in the communal dining hall. I visited every weekend, and each time she seemed fine, happy even, but then little by little, things started to feel off. It began with her memory. "Did you enjoy the bingo night?" I asked her one Saturday. Her face went blank. "What bingo night?" "You told me about it on Tuesday," I said, trying to jog her memory. But she just shook her head, frowning. I wrote it off as age catching up with her. Everyone forgets things sometimes, right? Then came the repetitive phrases. She'd laugh and tell me the same story about her neighbor's cat 3 times in one conversation. It wasn't just forgetfulness. It felt rehearsed, like she was stuck on a loop. I started paying closer attention during my visits, watching for anything unusual. One afternoon, while she napped, I decided to tidy up her room. That's when I found the file. It was tucked beneath a pile of magazines on her nightstand, labeled with her name and a number I didn't recognize. Inside were pages of notes, written in neat clinical handwriting. Subject demonstrates compliance with conditioning. Memory alteration at 60% success. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. The notes detailed her daily schedule, what she ate, who she spoke to, how she reacted to certain questions. Phrases like cognitive reinforcement and neural calibration jumped out at me. I stuffed the file back under the magazines before she woke up, my mind racing. The next day, I confronted the staff. They brushed it off, insisting it was a standard health report. "We monitor all residents closely," the head nurse said with a practiced smile. "It's part of our commitment to their well-being." But their reassurance felt hollow. That night, I started researching. Sunrise Pines wasn't just any retirement home. It was owned by a private healthcare corporation with a history of experimental trials. Lawsuits and allegations littered the search results, but the cases always seemed to settle quietly. I decided to dig deeper. The following weekend, I arrived unannounced. The receptionist's smile faltered when she saw me, and I noticed the cameras in the lobby swivel slightly in my direction. I headed straight to Mom's room, hoping to grab the file before anyone noticed. But when I got there, it was gone. The magazine sat in the same neat stack, but the file had vanished. "What are you looking for?" Mom asked, startling me. She stood in the doorway, her eyes glassy. For the first time, I noticed how robotic her movements were, how her expression didn't quite match her voice. "Nothing," I lied. "Just cleaning up." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You shouldn't worry so much." That night, I waited in my car, watching the building long after visiting hours ended. Around midnight, a van pulled up to the side entrance. 2 men in scrubs wheeled out a gurney, a motionless figure strapped under a sheet. They loaded it into the van and drove off without turning on their headlights. I tried to follow, but they lost me after a few blocks. The next morning, I demanded answers. The staff denied everything, insisting no one had been removed from the premises. They grew more agitated with my questions, eventually threatening to call security if I didn't leave. When I returned the following weekend, my mom was gone. Her room had been cleared out, her belongings packed away. The administrator claimed she'd decided to move closer to family, but when I called the number they provided, it was disconnected. I filed a missing persons report, but the police hit a wall almost immediately. Her medical records were sealed, and the staff refused to cooperate. Now, months later, I'm still searching for her. Every lead I follow ends in silence. Every inquiry is met with indifference or hostility. I don't know what they did to her or why, but I can't shake the feeling that Sunrise Pines was never a retirement home at all. It was a testing ground, and my mom was just another number in their experiment. Don't forget to subscribe. You are the best.